I remember the day my heart stopped. Whether it was the end of breath or the end of self, I cannot fully explain. But in that moment, it felt as though every wall I had built between myself and eternity had fallen. The noise of the world grew silent. The pride that once whispered, "You're fine, you're strong, you're in control," disappeared into nothingness. What followed was a stillness I had never known. A silence that spoke louder than all the sermons I had ever preached. I realized then that death is not merely an event at the end of life. Sometimes it is a visitation meant to awaken a soul still breathing but not truly alive. As I stood at the threshold between this world and what lies beyond, I felt the weight of truth pressing on me. It wasn't the truth of doctrine, not the truth I could recite from memory. It was the truth that pierces the heart. Every secret, every hidden thought, every action done in darkness stood exposed. In that light, I saw who I really was. Not the pastor, not the preacher, not the man with words, but a soul naked before the holiness of God. I saw how easy it is for humans to live two lives, one in the light for others to see, and another in the shadows where only God looks. In that place, there was no hiding. There was no pretending. The holiness that surrounded me wasn't cruel, but it was consuming. It didn't accuse me, it revealed me. I felt an overwhelming love, but it was a love that demanded truth. In that love, I understood how God sees sin, not as a list of wrongs to punish, but as wounds that destroy His children from the inside. I saw that what we call private sins are not private at all. They echo through our spirit. They dull our sensitivity to God. They distance us from the voice that wants to guide us home. I remembered moments in my life when I brushed aside conviction, when I said, "This is small, this doesn't hurt anyone." Yet in that encounter, I saw how those small compromises weave a web around the heart, a web that traps the soul in darkness. It wasn't the grand sins that chained me. It was the little ones I refused to let go of. I realized that spiritual death often begins long before physical death. It begins when the voice of the Holy Spirit is silenced by our excuses. As I stood there, I understood that the greatest tragedy is not dying. It is dying without having truly lived for the one who gave his life for you. And true living is not found in comfort or success or even ministry. It's found in intimacy with Jesus. In that moment between life and eternity, I didn't think about achievements, buildings, or titles. I thought about the moments I ignored His whisper, the times I resisted His correction, the nights I sought pleasure instead of presence. Everything else faded. Only one question remained echoing in my spirit: did you love me with your whole heart? The light of Jesus didn't condemn me, it called me. It called me to wake up. It called me to remember that time is short, that eternity is real, and that purity of heart is not optional. It's essential. He showed me that many live half dead because they've traded intimacy with Him for moments of temporary satisfaction. He said to me, "You have spoken of my power, but have you sought my heart?" I could not answer. My lips trembled. In His presence, there were no clever words, only surrender. He showed me how fragile life is, how quickly the breath that fills our lungs can be taken. And yet, in that same moment, He showed me mercy. He gave me another chance to live differently, to live fully awake. He said, "Go back and tell them that I am not far. I am not angry. I am waiting. I do not want their rituals, I want their hearts. I do not seek their perfection, I seek their surrender. Tell them to return before death returns for them." His voice wasn't thunder. It was tender. It carried both authority and compassion, like a father calling his child home after wandering too long in the dark. When I opened my eyes again, the world around me was the same, but I was not. The air felt different. Every breath felt borrowed. Every heartbeat felt like grace. I knew then that I had not been shown death to fear it, but to understand life. The revelation was simple yet terrifying. Most people are alive, but they are not awake. They are walking, working, speaking, but their souls are asleep. They believe they have time. They believe they can deal with their sins later. But later is not promised. So I came back with a message burning in my spirit that life is sacred, that purity matters, that the hidden things will one day be revealed. I came back to say that grace is not a license to stay asleep. It is the alarm clock of heaven, ringing to awaken the sleeping church. You don't need to die to see eternity. You only need to listen when Jesus calls. When you finally hear His voice and let go of what binds you, that's when life truly begins. And in that moment I knew death was not my end. It was my awakening. When the Lord appeared to me, His eyes carried a light I cannot describe. It was not the light of this world. It was truth itself. In that brilliance, nothing could be hidden. There were no shadows left to hide behind, no clever explanations to offer, no words to justify what my heart had excused. I stood before the one who knows the thoughts we never speak, the desires we never confess, the habits we secretly cling to. And as His gaze met mine, I felt Him gently peel away every layer of pretense I had built. He did not come with anger. He did not come with a voice of condemnation. His voice was soft, yet it carried the weight of eternity. It was as if He spoke and my soul remembered what it was created for. He said, "You speak to others about holiness, but what about the holiness within your own thoughts?" I wanted to look away, but I could not. His love held me still. I realized that when Jesus confronts sin, He does not do it to shame us. He does it to heal us. He does it because He knows that sin, no matter how private, slowly eats away at the soul, until all that remains is emptiness disguised as satisfaction. He showed me how the heart can become divided, how one part worships while another hides. We lift our hands in prayer, but our minds drift toward the things we do not want anyone to know. We ask for revival, yet secretly feed habits that keep us spiritually numb. Jesus said, "You cannot carry my power if your heart remains chained to what defiles it." His words pierced me. I saw how easy it is for people to call themselves believers and yet live with secret idols that steal their intimacy with God. Then He spoke of the secret sins people justify, the ones that seem harmless because no one else sees them. He said, "These are the ones that wound my spirit the most, because they are the ones done in darkness, while calling upon my name in the light." He was not speaking of the act alone, but the heart behind it. The loneliness, the brokenness, the false comfort that tries to fill the void only His love can satisfy. He said, "When my children seek relief instead of relationship, they are not sinning merely against a command. They are rejecting the comfort of my presence." I felt the weight of His sorrow, not because He was angry, but because He longed for His people to be whole. He said, "I did not create your body for shame, but for glory. I gave you desire so that it could be sanctified in love, not consumed in isolation." His words carried both mercy and power. It was as though He was saying, "You are more than what you have done. You were made for holiness." I saw then that what the enemy uses as a weapon of guilt, Jesus transforms into an invitation to purity. As He spoke, I realized how easily sin becomes a substitute for intimacy. It promises release but delivers emptiness. It offers control but produces bondage. And when we engage in it, we teach our souls to look for pleasure instead of presence. But Jesus does not want to simply remove the act. He wants to heal the wound that drives it. He wants to touch the deep place in the heart where loneliness whispers, "This will make you feel better." He wants to silence that lie with His love. He showed me a vision of people who looked radiant in worship, but carried chains around their hearts. He said, "They sing, they pray, but they do not let me in where it hurts the most." His voice was filled with compassion. "Tell them that I am not ashamed of their struggle. I only want them to bring it to me. I cannot heal what they continue to hide." In that moment, I felt the Father's heart for His children. He was not looking for perfection. He was looking for honesty. The kind of honesty that breaks the silence of shame and says, "Lord, I am tired of pretending. I need your help." He reminded me that he is not afraid of human weakness. He does not withdraw from it. He enters into it with redemption. Every person who has failed, every heart that has fallen into secret sin, he sees them not as lost causes, but as sons and daughters who have forgotten their worth. He said, "Tell them I am not angry with them. Tell them I am still reaching for them. I died not to expose them, but to free them." I wept as I heard those words. The holiness of God and the mercy of God met in one place, in the heart of Jesus. His truth burns, but his love restores. I understood then that conviction is not punishment. It is proof that he still cares. He convicts us because he wants us back. He exposes what is hidden not to destroy us, but to cleanse us so his spirit can dwell freely in us again. He said, "The sin that you keep in the dark has more power than the sin you bring into my light." And that truth shook me. For so long, people try to manage their sin in secret, believing that silence equals control. But silence is the enemy's greatest weapon. When you bring your weakness before Jesus, you take away its power. When you confess, you open the door for grace to enter. As I stood there, overwhelmed by his presence, he stretched out his hand and said, "I am not ashamed to touch what others call unclean. I am not afraid to restore what shame has broken. I am the Lord who makes all things new." And in that moment, I felt the chains of guilt and fear break. It was as if his voice reached into every corner of my being and said, "You are mine, and I am not letting you go." What Jesus told me that day was not meant to shock with fear. It was meant to awaken with love. He wants his people to know that sin is not greater than his mercy, and shame is not stronger than his blood. He wants every hidden heart to know that freedom begins not with strength, but with surrender. That is what he told me, and it changed everything. When the Lord began to show me the deeper truth, I understood something I had never seen so clearly before. The issue was not just what I was doing, but why. The sin was not rooted in the action. It was rooted in the emptiness behind it. The true battlefield was not in the flesh. It was in the heart. Jesus showed me that behind every repeated failure, every hidden indulgence, there is a deeper cry, a longing for comfort, a hunger for peace, a thirst for love. And when the soul does not find its satisfaction in him, it begins to search for substitutes. He said, "You do not fight lust with willpower. You overcome it by love." You cannot fill emptiness with pleasure, because emptiness cannot be filled by what is temporary. Those words sank deep into my spirit. I saw that every time we reach for something other than God to soothe our pain, we are not simply breaking a commandment. We are turning away from his presence. We are saying, "This will help me more than you can." And yet, the very thing we choose leaves us emptier than before. The cycle continues, not because we desire sin, but because we have forgotten what true satisfaction feels like. Jesus said, "My people are feeding on ashes and wondering why they still hunger." That pierced me. We live in a generation that is full but starving, connected but lonely, entertained but empty. We run after things that promise fulfillment, but leave the soul desolate. He showed me how sin always advertises relief but delivers regret. It whispers, "Just once more," but never says, "It will cost your peace, your focus, your intimacy with God." The enemy doesn't tempt us with what is evil. He tempts us with what feels like comfort. But every false comfort carries poison hidden beneath its sweetness. As the Lord spoke, I saw that what many call addiction is often just a symptom of misplaced worship. When we seek satisfaction outside of God, we build altars to our own desires. It may look small, private, even harmless, but in the spiritual realm, it's a form of idolatry. He said, "You were not created to comfort yourself. You were created to commune with me." And I began to understand that the Holy Spirit, was never meant to be a visitor in our hearts. He is supposed to be our source, our constant well of life. But when that well is neglected, the heart becomes dry, and in dryness, sin becomes appealing. He showed me the difference between relief and restoration. Relief is temporary. It numbs you for a moment. Restoration is divine. It heals you forever. Relief makes you forget. Restoration makes you whole. Many people chase relief through sin because they've never tasted restoration through surrender. And when they fall, guilt covers them like a shadow, making them believe they're too unworthy to come back. But Jesus said, "I did not die to keep you away from me. I died to bring you home. I do not want you to hide your wounds. I want to heal them." The more I listened, the more I realized how misunderstood the battle truly is. People think purity is about self-control, but purity is really about connection. When you are deeply connected to Jesus, sin loses its attraction. The closer you are to light, the less you desire the dark. But when distance grows, temptation thrives. He said, "Stay close to me, and even your thoughts will be guarded by peace." I could feel His love drawing me, not demanding perfection, but inviting intimacy. He wasn't asking me to suppress my humanity. He was teaching me to surrender it to His divinity. Then He showed me the heart of the Father, how much it aches when His children seek counterfeit comfort. He said, "When you reach for sin, you are not chasing rebellion, you are chasing relief. But I am the relief you seek. Come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you rest." I wept because I saw how often we run from the very one who can heal us. We carry guilt that keeps us distant, and the longer we stay away, the stronger temptation becomes. But Jesus does not reject the broken, He restores them. The moment we turn back, grace meets us faster than guilt can accuse us. He said, "Tell my people that their emptiness is not a curse. It is an invitation. I leave space in their hearts that only I can fill. But when they fill it with the world, they lose the sense of my presence." That truth burned in me. I realized that the goal is not to fight sin harder, but to love Jesus deeper. The more His love consumes you, the less power sin has. It's not about saying no to temptation. It's about saying yes to a greater love. When the heart is full of God, temptation becomes powerless. You cannot crave what you have already surrendered. You cannot be enslaved by what no longer satisfies. The Lord showed me that freedom is not found in discipline alone, but in delight. Delighting in His word, delighting in His presence, delighting in who He is. When you delight in Him, the desire for sin fades like mist in the morning sun. He said, "My grace is not only forgiveness, it is fuel for transformation. It is not only pardon, it is power." Grace is what turns the wounded into warriors, the addicted into anointed, the ashamed into ambassadors of purity. Grace teaches you not to hide from God after you fall, but to run toward Him, knowing He will lift you again. That day I understood that sin is not defeated by shame, but by intimacy. The problem was never the body. It was the hunger of the heart. And only when that hunger is filled by Jesus can true freedom begin. That is when I learned the greatest truth of all. The love of Christ does not just cleanse, it completes. When Jesus began to speak to me about grace, I realized that I had misunderstood it my entire life. I had preached it, I had sung about it, I had thanked God for it, but I had never truly grasped its depth. In His presence, grace was not a word. It was a living power, flowing like light from His very being. It was not weak. It was not permission to fail. It was not an excuse to remain bound. Grace was the very strength of heaven offered to the weakness of man. It was God Himself stooping down to lift the fallen, not just to forgive them, but to restore them to the image they had lost. He said, "My grace does not cover your chains, it breaks them." When I heard that, my heart trembled, because for so long, many of us have treated grace like a soft blanket to hide our sins under, instead of the sword that cuts them away. We've said, "God understands," and yes, He does. but His understanding does not mean approval. His love is not a permission slip, it is a rescue plan. Grace is not a hiding place for sin, it is the fire that consumes it. As I listened, I felt waves of love and conviction washing over me. Jesus said, "You cannot walk in freedom if you see grace only as forgiveness. You must see it as power." Then He reminded me of His words in Scripture, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness." That was not a poetic line, it was a divine revelation. The weaker you admit you are, the stronger His grace becomes in you. But if you keep pretending to be strong, grace remains distant, waiting for your surrender. He showed me that sin loses its power only when we allow His grace to enter the place where we are weakest. He said, "You cannot overcome what you will not expose. Bring it into my light, and you will see that my grace is not a distant concept. It is my hand pulling you out of darkness." I saw how the enemy tries to twist grace into complacency. He whispers, "You're forgiven, so don't worry." But Jesus whispers something different. "You're forgiven, now rise and walk." Grace never leaves you where it found you. It always calls you higher. I could feel His compassion when He said, "I did not die to make people religious, I died to make them free." Those words burned inside of me. True grace does not produce pride, it produces humility. It makes you fall on your knees and say, "If not for you, I am nothing." It makes you love righteousness, not because you have to, but because His love changes what you desire. That's the mystery of grace. It doesn't just cleanse behavior, it transforms appetite. It doesn't just forgive sin, it changes your taste for it. What once attracted you begins to disgust you, not because of guilt, but because the light of His love has redefined your pleasure. Jesus then showed me that many people struggle because they try to change themselves before coming to Him. They think they need to be pure to deserve grace. But grace is the power that makes you pure. It is not the reward of the holy, it is the gift to the broken. He said, "Stop trying to clean yourself before coming to me. Come, and I will make you clean." I saw that grace is not a slow process of human effort. It is an immediate release of divine mercy. The moment you surrender, grace rushes in like a flood. It does not wait for your perfection, it begins your transformation. He showed me the cross, and I saw not only His suffering but the strength that flowed through His wounds. Every drop of blood was power. Power to heal, to renew, to restore. That blood is grace in liquid form. It speaks louder than guilt, stronger than temptation, and deeper than shame. When that blood touches your spirit, it does not just erase your past, it rewrites your future. Jesus said, "Do you see now? My grace is not the end of repentance. It is the beginning of holiness." That sentence echoed in my soul. Holiness is not built by human willpower. It grows where grace has taken root. And grace only takes root where humility lives. The proud man cannot receive grace because he still believes he can fix himself. But the broken, the weary, the desperate, they are the ones who experience its full power. As I wept before Him, I realized that grace was not a gentle whisper. It was a mighty river. It carried me away from condemnation and into peace. It washed away the dirt of shame, not because I was worthy, but because He called me His. And in that moment, I knew the same grace that saved me could sustain me. I didn't need to live in fear of falling again. I needed only to live in dependence on Him. Grace doesn't mean you won't stumble. It means every time you do, there is a hand waiting to lift you again. He said, "When you fail, don't run from me, run to me. My grace runs faster than your sin. My mercy reaches deeper than your fall." That truth shattered every lie of condemnation I had believed. I saw that guilt pushes us away from God, but grace pulls us closer. And when grace fills you, the chains that once held you lose their grip, not because you are stronger, but because His love now rules where fear once lived. The world misunderstands grace as weakness, but in heaven, grace is victory. It is heaven's answer to every human struggle. It is the breath of God breathing new life into dead hearts. It is the song that turns shame into worship, bondage into breakthrough, tears into testimony. And when you truly experience it, you can never go back to pretending. You begin to live differently, not out of duty, but out of love. You begin to desire holiness, not to impress God, but to be closer to Him. That is when you understand grace is not a story of escape from judgment. It is the story of transformation through love. When the Lord finished speaking to me about grace, there was a silence that felt holy. It was the kind of silence where your heart knows heaven is still speaking, even if words have stopped. And in that stillness I heard Him whisper, "Now that you have received my grace, walk in purity. For purity is not punishment, it is power." His words sank deep into me. I understood then that purity was never meant to be a burden carried by the strong, but a gift carried by the surrendered. It was not a list of rules to obey. It was the fragrance of a heart that had been washed by love. He said, "Purity is not perfection. It is alignment. It is when your heart beats in rhythm with mine." That truth struck me like lightning. So many people think purity means being flawless, never making mistakes, never feeling temptation. But that is not true. Purity means that when temptation comes, your love for God speaks louder than your desire for sin. It means your heart has chosen Him again and again, until choosing Him becomes your nature. And as he said this, I realized that holiness was not about distance from the world. It was about closeness to Him. The closer you walk with Jesus, the more the world loses its grip on you. He showed me how many live as though purity is something only a few can achieve, as though it belongs to saints, not ordinary people. But he said, "I call every believer to purity because it is the doorway to power. When the heart is pure, faith becomes strong. When the heart is pure, prayer carries authority. When the heart is pure, even silence speaks louder than sermons. A pure heart is not distracted by what the flesh wants. It is focused on what the Spirit desires. And that is why the enemy attacks purity so fiercely. He knows that if he can corrupt the heart, he can weaken the power." Jesus said, "Tell my people that purity is not about suppression. It is about transformation. It is not the absence of desire, it is the redirection of desire." The human heart was created to long, to burn, to yearn. But that fire was meant for God. When that fire is turned toward the world, it consumes. When it is turned toward heaven, it purifies. The same passion that once drew you toward sin can, when redeemed, draw you toward worship. The Lord does not remove your passion. He sanctifies it. He turns what once enslaved you into what now fuels your calling. As he spoke, I saw that purity is not a lonely life. It is a liberated one. The world calls it restriction, but in truth, it is freedom. Sin makes you heavy. Purity makes you light. Sin clouds your mind. Purity clears your vision. Sin promises excitement, but leaves you empty. Purity may begin with surrender, but it ends in joy. And that joy is not the temporary thrill of pleasure. It is the deep peace of knowing your heart is clean before God. That peace cannot be purchased, imitated, or replaced. It is the peace of a conscience that no longer hides in shadows, the peace of a soul that can stand before the presence of God without shame. He said, "When you walk in purity, you carry my presence easily. You will not need to force revival. It will flow naturally from you." And I saw how true that was. A pure vessel doesn't need to shout to be heard in heaven. When the heart is clean, prayer becomes effortless. When the heart is pure, faith becomes instinct. The Spirit moves freely where there is no clutter of sin. Many cry for power, but few seek purity. Yet the two are inseparable. You cannot have divine authority without divine alignment. I asked the Lord, "How can your people remain pure in a world filled with temptation?" And He answered gently, "By staying near me. Purity is not maintained by effort. It is sustained by presence." He reminded me of how a branch bears fruit not by striving, but by remaining connected to the vine. When you stay in His presence, what once tempted you loses its flavor. When you drink deeply of His Spirit, the old cravings fade like shadows at sunrise. You do not have to fight sin in your strength. You only need to remain in His light. Darkness cannot stay where light dwells. He showed me how many believers fall not because they are weak, but because they are distant. They pray without intimacy, they worship without surrender, they serve without love. But purity thrives only where love is alive. The more you love Him, the more you desire to please Him. Sin becomes unthinkable when you realize it breaks the heart of the one who saved you. That is why purity is not fear-driven, it is love-driven. Fear may stop you for a moment, but only love can keep you faithful forever. Then He spoke about purpose. He said, purity prepares you for purpose. I cannot pour new wine into old wineskins. I cleanse not to condemn, but to prepare. I saw that God's desire for our holiness is not to make us miserable, but to make us useful. He cleanses us so His glory can flow through us without mixture. The greater the calling, the greater the cleansing, and that cleansing often feels like loss at first. Loss of comfort, loss of habits, loss of self. But in the end, it is gain beyond measure. The pure heart becomes a channel of divine power, a vessel that carries heaven's fragrance into the darkest places. He said, tell my people, I am not calling them to shame, but to shining. Purity is light. It does not judge, it reveals. It does not boast, it reflects. That is what the world needs today. Not louder voices, but brighter ones. Not perfect people, but pure hearts. When the world sees the purity of Christ shining through His people, it will recognize His reality again. Purity is not outdated, it is eternal. It is the mark of those who have truly been with Jesus. As He finished speaking, my heart felt both heavy and light. Heavy with reverence, light with hope. I knew then that purity was not just about morality, it was about mission. God purifies us not to isolate us, but to send us out shining. He wants His people to walk in the kind of holiness that doesn't push others away, but draws them closer to His love. The kind of holiness that makes the broken say, if that is what Jesus looks like, I want to know Him too. And when that happens, when the people of God rise up not in perfection but in purity, the world will see the power of redemption, and the glory of the risen Christ will once again fill the earth.